Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? We got the man of the year with us today. This man's cred is legendary in New York, Metropolis, and Gotham, man. Let him know who we got.
Today we got legendary comic writer Jeph Loeb with us. But before we chat with Jeff, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest is a legend in the comic book industry. He has written classic stories like Batman Hush, Batman Long Halloween, Spider-Man Blue, Daredevil Yellow, and Superman Batman Public Enemies. He has served as an executive for Marvel Television for projects like Daredevil and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Slam, we bring to you the one and only Jeph Loeb. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. With an introduction like that, you guys should just come over to my house every day and just so I know who I am, because it's hard to remember.
Oh man, Jeff, thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you on the show. We're gonna just dive right on in.
Sure.
All right, so Jeff, we normally ask people how they got their first gig in pro comics, but we read that you got your start in Hollywood before comics, writing the original Teen Wolf and Commando, which is, I think, is a sleeper Schwarzenegger flick. I used to love that back in the day. So Jeff, tell us how you got into comics from movies.
I was the first guy, which is because obviously now it's common and it's, everyone that's in comics is trying to get into the movies. I was in the movies, but I always loved comics. And I had a deal at Warner Brothers, and was, one of the things that's hard for people to understand is that most writers in movies make their living writing movies that never get made. And I got very lucky. The first two movies that I wrote, Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox and Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, both got made. And one was a teen comedy and one was an action with comedy in it, and that was sort of like I was 23 years old. I had no idea how lucky I was, or I just sort of went, well, I guess this is how it works. And then 20 years later, I was like, well, I guess it doesn't always work like that. But it kept me working, and I met, you meet one person and then another person, and studios, at least then, were very competitive. So if you had a movie that was at Disney, then the people at Warner Brothers would call you, and the people at Universal would call you. And so it was again, I never really knew how lucky I was. I'd gone to film school and learned, sort of the basics of writing and screenwriting and production. And then moved to Hollywood. I was in New York City. I moved to Hollywood, and I did not know anybody, and you do what you can. You just meet people, keep writing. I constantly get asked questions like, do you have anything that I can read? And early on, I was sort of arrogant enough where I'd go, yeah, when you hire me, you can read the script and I'm going to write for you. So it was Commando that really opened the door. It was a spec script, and so the spec means you don't get paid for it, but you hope you can sell it. Wrote the spec script, it got made, it was a big hit. Teen Wolf was a big hit. And so the sort of shortly after that, wound up over at Warner Brothers, got a movie made there. But while I was there, the guys who had made the Michael Keaton Batman, John Peters and Peter Guber, and my friend, really my best friend, and he's responsible for so many people that I've met and ultimately getting me into my success, is a guy by the name of Stan Brooks, who's directed and produced like 70 made-for-TV movies and is godfather to my daughter, and and I'm godfather to his sons. So we're extremely close friends, and this is early on in our relationship. Anyway, he happened to be running the television division over at Guber Peters, and they had this idea that there were other characters that were in the DC universe. Again, you have to remember, this is late 80s. Like, they had just made the Michael Keaton Batman. Like, they were as surprised that was a hit as anybody else. So the only thing that had ever worked was Superman, the Donner film. And everything else was just sort of like, well, we don't know if anything else works. Certainly none of the Marvel movies work. And so the Keaton movie comes out. It's a giant smash hit. The sequel is getting ready to get made. And through Stan, they found out about me and that I was on the lot and that I had a deal. And they said, so you're like a comic guy. Can you come over and talk to us? And I was like, sure. I mean, maybe I'll get a gig on Batman. That'd be the coolest thing in the world. And they said, we were looking through the catalog and we thought that it would be kind of a cool idea if we did The Flash with Michael J. Fox. Now, I don't know that Michael was ever aware of this in any way, shape, or form. This is just what they told me. And they said, since you know Michael, like we were hanging out every day. Since you know Michael from making Teen Wolf, maybe that'll help and he'll, want to do the movie. And so I was like, yeah, okay. I don't really know The Flash. Even though I was like a huge comic fan and I have a giant collection, like The Flash was not, I'm not Jeff Johns. That's the end of the conversation. And so they said, well, and we got a piece of artwork, which I still have, which is Carmine Infantino drew Michael J. Fox in like street clothes running. It's about a foot to maybe 18 inches long and about that wide. And it's multiple versions of Michael, and he's running, and as he's running, his clothes are coming off and his costume's going on, and then at the end he runs away as the Flash. And that to me was the coolest thing in the world.
You have that art, you said?
I do have that art, yeah.
What?
And
wow.
And so they hired me, and this is the only time this has ever happened to me in all the years I've worked in the business. I went away, and after about 2-3 weeks, I called him and I said, and I did call a couple of other friends that worked on it. I didn't know Geoff at that point, I don't think. And I don't think I knew Mark Waid, who probably would have really helped. But at the time, I was like reading all these Flash stories, and I don't ever approach anything from the point of view of the hero. I approach it from the point of view of the person. So that's why people, I think, respond to For All Seasons, because I'm writing Clark. I'm not writing Superman. And that's what I think is the most interesting. Except I think Batman is the real person and Bruce is the person that he fakes being.
Right.
But in the case of the Flash, and this is not, please, if you're a Flash fan, don't write to me. Don't go on Reddit and say Jeph Loeb hates Flash. Don't do any of that stuff. I'm the idiot. I'm the first one to go, I was the wrong guy. And I just said, I don't understand who Barry Allen is. Like, he's a scientist and he gets struck by chemicals and lightning and he becomes the Flash. And I'm like, but who is Barry? And everyone was like, well, he's a scientist. And I went, oh, okay. About what? Like, well, he's a forensic scientist. Okay, well, that's okay. There was no CSI at that time, so I didn't know what any of that meant. And so he was, and they didn't really do it like that. It was sort of, he was a police scientist, which was this like non-job. Like, I was like, I didn't even understand that part. And I said, and then he runs. That's what he does. Like, he can run. Yeah, it's cool that he can run through a wall, but that's like, okay, once you've done that twice in a movie, like, then the audience is like going, does he do anything else? Like, Superman can fly, and he's got heat vision, and Batman's got all these gadgets, and the Flash is just like running. And so I was like, and please, I understand that because of Mark Waid and because of Geoff Johns, like there was the multiverse and there was Speed Force and there was all these super cool things that they came up with long after I was trying to write this movie. And if I had that information, yes, I could have said, well, he could do this and maybe this. The best thing I came up with, and they actually stole it and put it in the comics, was that whenever he ran, and I think they gave this to Wally, was that he would get really hungry and he had to eat candy bars all the time. And they were like, that's great, do more of that. And I was like, there is no more than that. That's just all there is just a guy eating candy bars. And, meanwhile, there's 7 seasons of like this great show on the air, and there's a movie, and he's in the Justice League. Like, it's all this stuff came long after me. And so I did something I've never done before. I quit. I went and I said, look, I'm really sorry. I can't figure this out. And, just do me a favor. And I called my agent and I said, just send the money back. Like, I didn't do anything, so I don't feel like I should get paid. And it was the first lesson. I mean, I learned a lot of lessons, but it was a big lesson to learn, which is you never give the money back. Because if you give the money back, like, some folks don't really understand how a movie gets made. So a producer, people think, because of the movie, the producers and all the comedy around that, people think that a producer has to go out and raise money. Well, he doesn't go out and raise money. He goes to the studio. They're the bank. So once the producer has convinced the studio that this is a great idea for the movie, then the studio then says, okay, well, this movie's probably going to cost us $100 million. We're going to take that, we're going to put that in a little big piggy bank, and we're going to wait till they have a great script, and then we'll make this movie. But when the writer says, there's no movie here, and I want to give the money back, then the producer goes, no, don't do that, because the studio will then go, well, if the writer doesn't think there's a movie there, then maybe there isn't a movie there, and we're not going to develop this. We're going to take our money back, and you go on your happy way. It was one of those situations where I couldn't give the money back, but they also didn't develop the movie. So it just died. And I never worked for those guys. And I embarrassed my friend Stan. And it was just a terrible experience, except after it was sort of settled and I'd signed all the paperwork and all that, I get a phone call from Jeanette Kahn, who at the time was the president and publisher at DC Comics. And I knew who Jeanette was. And she said, listen, if you're not going to write a movie for us, would you write a comic book for us? Which to me was the equivalent of like Santa Claus showing up at my house in July and going, I missed you at Christmas time, but let's go over to Toys R Us and I've got an American Express card. You get whatever you want. I mean, I so much rather write a comic book than write a movie than any day of the week. And I didn't know anything. Again, you have to remember, like, I collected comics. I could tell you anything you wanted to know about comics, except I didn't know anything about the Flash, obviously. And so, but I didn't know how comics were made. I just read the little box down below and I just went, oh, look, there's Roy Thomas and John Buscema. And they're doing kick-ass Avenger stories. Love that. Okay, I want to be one of those guys. And so she said, okay, I'm going to have Dick Giordano, who's our number 2 here, call you, and he's going to be out in California, and you got, because they were in New York at the time, and you guys will talk about what characters you can do. And I was like, okay, super cool. And it was super cool. Again, this is how the geek that I'm in is that I only knew Dick Giordano as an inker, and that he inked Neil Adams. And Neil Adams is like the coolest of cool. So I was like, I'll take a meeting with this guy just to talk about Neil Adams. I don't care about the comics. Let's just talk about Neil. So I meet Dick. He's such a sweet man, and he's gone now, but he was just a lovely guy. And he said, so you want to write a comic for us? And I said, well, sure, that'd be great. He said, well, what do you want to write? I said, well, I want to write Superman. And he said, well, we have people who write Superman. And I thought the comics, because I had seen fill-in issues, so I thought comics were like television shows where like you have to go out and find freelancers to do an episode because you got 24 of them or 22 of them or 20 of them. I mean, now you've got 6 of them, so you could do it. But when you have 22 to 24, and it's a way for people to get into the business. So you hire a freelancer who's not part of staff, and they write it for you, and hopefully they're a genius. So I was like, okay, well then can I write Batman? And they went, no, we have someone write Batman. And I was like, okay, rather than doing it this way, let's go this way. Why don't you make a list of all the characters that are available, and I'll pick out of that list. So, he was prepared. He brings this list out. There's like 3 pages. There's like 100 names on each page. And I got to tell you guys, you have no idea how many characters start with A. They're in alphabetical order. And you have no idea how many characters start with A in the DC universe. So I was like, well, I'll do Aquaman. And they're like, no, we have somebody who writes Aquaman. Well, I'll do the Atom. They said, no, we have somebody that does that. Well, I'll do Amazing Man. And they were like, no, we have somebody doing Amazing Man. And I was like, okay. And then we got to the Bees. And when you get to the Bees, you're like, Batman, Batman family, Batman's and friends, Batman's dog, Batman's girlfriend, Batman's the and they were like, no. So finally we get to the C's, and we're going through, and we hit. This is exactly how it has happened. This is at a lunch. We hit Challenge of the Unknown. Yeah. And I didn't even know who they were. I was just picking names at this point. And he goes, I got a check, but I think you're clear on Challenge of the Unknown. I'll call you tomorrow. So next day he calls and he says, yeah, we can do it. You're cleared. I said, I want to do like an 8-part miniseries because I can't promise you I can do a monthly book or anything. And he was like, monthly? You'll be lucky if you get one. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So I was like, wow, I should find out who these guys are. And so I went to, again, you got to remember, there was no internet. You couldn't just Google it up and figure all that stuff out. And I was a big fan of Grant Morrison's Animal Man. And I liked that he had taken this sort of like character that nobody knew and sort of made him, as we used to say, relevant for the times. And so I, for a guy that was in his 20s, I thought, I'm going to tell a story about what it's like to be 40 and have a midlife crisis as a superhero. And that's what it'll be. And they'll make a giant mistake. And then this is how they sort of redeem themselves as new characters. And I went to the comic book store that I used to always go to. And I said to the guy, do you have any Challenge of the Unknown? And he said, well, let me go in the back. And this book had not been published in 10 years. They had not appeared in 10 years. So I was thinking to myself, this is why they gave this to me, because they figured you're not going to hurt anything. I think they thought I was going to like chop off Superman's head or something. Like, I don't know what they thought I was going to do, but I was complete. They were just like, this Hollywood guy wants to come write comics. We've never had a Hollywood guy do that. Like everybody that worked in comics came from comics in one way or the other. Like Peter David, who I admire and miss, like he worked in sales. He was in the marketing team, and then they let him write a comic, and then he became Peter David. And a lot of guys, that's the way it happened. Or you wrote a spec comic book script, and then you went to a Comic-Con and you met a guy, and that's how you got it. But there wasn't anybody that was like, there was certainly nobody that was working in the movie business that suddenly wanted to be a comic book guy. And so I talking to the guy, and he says, well, let me go in the back. I'll see what we got. He comes out and he's got a long box. And I said, well, what do you got there? And he goes, I have Challenge of the Unknown 1 through 78. That's the entire run. And the first issue is Jack Kirby. Then after that, it's Bob Brown. And then after that, it's a whole bunch of other guys. And I said, wow, 78 issues. Like, how much do you want for that? And he goes, $5. I need the room for the box. And I went, $5? I said, I am on a train to disaster. They're going to put this book out. No one's going to know who these people are. So I went, I read them all. The biggest thing that I got out of it was that in those days, comics were colored. They were only colored with 4 colors. There was brown and red and blue and yellow and or green, I guess. And so if the colorist made a mistake and colored their hair wrong, I didn't know who I was talking to because they all looked like Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And that was, I'm not running down Bob Brown. Please don't go on Reddit and tell me that I'm running down Bob Brown. You go look at those comics, and when they're talking to each other, you have no idea who anybody is unless they're continually repeating their name, which nobody talks like that. And so I decided, look, I'm gonna cast this, and I'm gonna find an artist that can kind of draw different looking people, like tall people and stout people and like people that are different looking. And off I go. This is 1989. The book didn't come out until 1991. That's how long it took.
Oh, wow.
And I go to San Diego Comic-Con, and at that point, San Diego was in the basement of the Grant Hotel. It was not in the big, huge, it was not 500,000 people. It was just in the basement of the hotel. And it was essentially a flea market. And so there was a big, huge ballroom that had tables with people who had long boxes of comics, dealers that were like selling stuff. And then there was a room that was adjacent to it that was what we now call Artist Alley, but it was just where the artists were. And they were basically there to like meet people and sometimes sign comics. But it was not the business that it is now. Right. And I only tell the story because I just love it so much. There are these 2 guys that are sitting together, and you have to understand, at this point I had an editor, Barbara Randall Kiesel, and she's now Barbara Randall again, and she and I sort of decided to divide up the whole convention, and we would meet at the end of the day and go, anybody? And I had a 40-page outline of what every issue was about and I just was writing it like a movie. So I was like, okay, well, you have to have an outline. You have to know where it's going. And so for 3 days, like, people just laughed. They wouldn't even, like, I'd get, hi, I'm Jeph Loeb. I wrote Teen Wolf. I wrote Commando, and I'm going to write a comic book. And they'd go, yeah, get out of line. And I can't, anyone that was working in comics at that time said no. And the one that I remember the most is I walked up to this table, and there are these 2 guys sitting together, and I'm looking through their artwork, and they're super talented young guys. And I said, hey, I'm Jeph Loeb, and I wrote Commando, and I wrote Teen Wolf, and I'm going to be doing this Challenge of the Unknown book at DC. And they both laughed like hysterically and said, we're going to be working on the X-Men. And I'm thinking to myself, no, fools, there's nobody. Like, John Byrne's working on the X-Men. He's never leaving that book. And you're never going to be working on that book. I didn't say any of these things. I just went, okay. And that's how I met Jim Lee and Will Spatasia. And to this day, Jim denies that story ever happened. And I was like, dude, I can't make that story up. They were on The Punisher at the time. And so we get to it's Sunday. Like, people are leaving. I'm completely heartbroken. Like, nobody wants to do my comic book. My dream is going to get crushed. And Barbara comes running up to me and says, I think we found our guy. And I said, well, why? What makes you think that? He said, well, first of all, he said yes. And I was like, okay, we're halfway home. And so she hands me this graphic novel, and it was a graphic novel. It was a treasury-sized book that was all black and white, and it was called Thieves World. It was based on a card game, kind of like Wizards of the Coast, and it was big at the time, but it was like 80 pages, but it was all medieval, and it was all regular people. There were no superheroes in it at all, but what I loved was that all the people, even just flipping through it, they all looked different. So I could tell what was going on without even reading the book. So I said, we got to go meet this guy. So I go over, and in a little corner table, there's a guy with long hair and, brutally handsome, incredibly sweet. And he's selling greeting cards, like handmade greeting cards. He doesn't even have art to sell. And I go over, and we start talking, and I said, do you like comics? And he's like, yeah, I love comics. And I said, who's some of your favorite artists? And he's like, Jack Kirby and Steranko and Neil Adams. And I'm like, Neil Adams? Okay, well, we got to work together. And I said, so you're interested in doing this Challengers thing? And he said, yeah, well, the characters were created by Jack Kirby, and that's a legacy. So yeah, I'd be into it. And what he told me years later was, I needed to pay the rent. Like, I needed a job. And that was Tim Sale. And
wow.
And that's how it just started, like the first book I ever did. And the comedy of it all, when we really get to how people work together, is that we couldn't afford a fax machine, and you couldn't take a picture of it and send it to somebody. Like, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So he would draw a page. Sometimes he'd draw 2 or 3 pages, and he would Xerox them at the FedEx, and then he would mail them to me. He lived in Seattle, and I lived in Los Angeles. So like once a week, I'd get a package. And then I would get on the phone with him. There was no script. I would just say to him, I think like on the next page, it starts panel 1, it's a close-up of Prof, and then panel 2 is like Red has got his gun out and he's shooting at a rifle range, and 3, and maybe they're horizontals, and then he would take notes, and then he'd start drawing. And that's how I thought comics were made. I didn't know I had to write a whole script or anything. He had the outline, but I sort of thought, well, you'll draw it the way he draws it. So he would turn in a page, and I would go, listen, I love the fact that you've drawn, this became the hallmark of who Tim was. You've drawn the whole store, like little tiny, like there's like shelves and characters on the shelves and toys and all kinds of collectibles and stuff. It's a beautifully drawn panel. And I was like, I was kind of thinking it was a close-up, like just his head. So can you just move the camera in? And he goes, what do you mean move the camera in? I said, well, just move the camera in. Can't you just like blow it up and just paste it in? And he's like, you want me to redraw the page? And I was like, yeah, I guess I do. And he goes, all right, because he didn't at that point know that he could just tell me to stick it in my ear. Like, he learned that by the second issue. But there are 64 pages for a 22-page story of the first issue, because we just kept redoing them over and over again until I sort of went, okay, that's kind of what we want it to be. I learned so much from working together with him. And the other funny story is that we introduced this new character named Moffat, who's this reporter. And I said to him, like, we both really dug this young comedian. And Tim doesn't draw likenesses at all. So like we decided that Rocky should look like Stallone. So he sort of looks like Stallone, but he doesn't look like Stallone. He just doesn't look like Bruce Wayne. And he's got sort of, what we call car door ears and cauliflower eyeballs and, that kind of thing. And that worked out really well. And so we brought up this reporter. I said, we should just do this comedian. That's a super cool idea. Let's do that. Nobody knows who he is. And by the time we got to like the third issue, which again is like years have gone by while we're working on this thing, the comedian gets a television show, and the comedian that he'd been drawing for like the first 3 or 4 issues is Jerry Seinfeld. And at that point, Jerry Seinfeld is the most famous person in the world. And so I said, you got to go back. We have to change all the heads on everybody. And so we both were big fans of this movie, Manhunter, which is sort of the first Hannibal Lecter story.
Yeah.
And Stephen Lang, who you probably know from Avatar, this is one of his first roles. And he's a sort of a know-it-all, obnoxious reporter in this movie. And I said, let's do him. So that's why, if you go back and look at it, it sort of looks like Stephen Lang. It doesn't really, but what it doesn't look like is Jerry Seinfeld. Anyway, the book comes out. I'm so glad you asked this question. A half hour's gone by. Anyway, the book comes out, and it's what we call a critical success. Like, it got well-reviewed. Nobody bought it. I think we sold 8,000 copies. But I got an Arthur Adams cover out of it. I got a Michael Golden cover out of it. I got a Brian Bolland cover out of it. Because I at least had the sense to go, well, if nobody's buying this for me and Tim, we should put a cool cover on it and see whether or not they'll buy it for the cover. I was way ahead of the cover curve before I did that. So, and I really wanted Neil to do one, and he wasn't available. And I really wanted Steranko to do one, and he just laughed. He was just like, no. And so Arthur Adams ripped off a Steranko cover, and it does, on the cover, it says Arthur Adams for Steranko, or honoring, whatever you say when you rip somebody off. And that was my idea. He was like, I'm not really comfortable. I said, just do the cover. Okay, that's fine. And again, you have to understand something. I was just going to do this. This is like a girl you take on a date and never intend to see again. Like, I was doing my Challenge the Unknown, done. I have a job. I have to go back to writing movies and television and stuff. Like, you can't do this stuff and do this other job. Of course I was. And about 2 years goes by, because we came out in 91, and then it was 93. So maybe it was a year later, because it took us about a year. And Tim, in the meantime, Archie Goodwin, who's my hero and the reason why I'm in this business and is undoubtedly the best writer and editor that's ever worked in our business. Just his period. Sorry, I'll have this conversation with you all night long about how great Stan and Jack are. Absolutely love them. Can't touch Archie. And Archie was our editor, and Archie saw something in the Child's book. He was not the editor on that book. We had 4 editors. That's how long it took, because people just quit. They were like, I can't. These guys turn in something every 3-4 months. And I was like, isn't that how you're supposed to do it? Isn't it like a movie? Like, just make it over 2 years? And they were like, no, we need a book every month. And I was like, I can't work like that. I don't know how to do that. And so Tim went off and with James Robinson did 3 issues of Legends of the Dark Knight, the Cavalier story. And the whole idea behind Legends of the Dark Knight was that you never repeated the teams. It was always the people that had never done Batman or had done Batman and wanted to come on and do a short story that didn't actually always fit into continuity. And so Archie called Tim and said, I really like working with you. How'd you like to come back and do it again? So he was the first guy to get asked back. And he said, I'll do it would you mind if Geoff wrote the story? And then I get this phone call and I'm like, what? Like, we had a horrible relationship. I tortured you for 2 years. Like, you needed to get a dog and kick it. Like, you don't need me. And he said, no, I think we do really good work together. And I really like Batman. And don't you want to write Batman? Like, isn't that better than anything? And so that's how we wound up doing the first Legends of the Dark Knight. And we did the first Halloween special. And it was, they had so little faith in it that they charged $7.95. There was never a comic that was cost $7.95 ever. So they were like thinking, well, maybe we'll sell 10,000 copies and we can pay for these two knuckleheads and the printing, because it was a square bound, it was a prestige format book, and it had foil on the cover. Like, it was expensive. And they were like, well, we got to somehow make the money back and hope that we sell 10,000 copies. And we sold 100,000 copies. And so all of a sudden they were like calling, going, what else can you guys do? And we were like, oh, I have another job. And so we wound up doing that, and that's how it all started. And it was to do the Long Halloween, and I, then I was on it for a year, and I was like, okay, I could do a monthly book, and Tim could do a monthly book, and we should go do that. And then the X-Men called, and suddenly I was in the X-Men office, like running around like a crazy person.
I have a question about because you answered like 5 of our questions. So
I tend to blah 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 a lot. So cut these.
But you gave us some nuggets, man, especially about the Tales of the Unknown with Tim Sale and how you met him. But I did want to ask a question about Geoff Johns, because you did bring him up. He mentioned you along with Richard Donner as 2 of his mentors. What did you? And
see? He says that to me, like, and I like. First of all, you have to understand something. Jeff's one of my best friends. So when your best friend says to you, "You're one of my mentors," I'm like, that makes me sound like I'm a Harvard professor that's 80 years old, and that you took a class with me 40 years ago. And he's like, "No, dude, it's just you've taught me a lot about the business." And the Dick Donner thing. Dick was one of my mentors. I barely knew him. Like, he was just a genius, and I would just sit. Anytime I could go over and see Geoff when he was working there, I'd be like, he'd go, "Hey, how you doing? You want to go out to lunch?" I was like, "No, I want to go into Dick's office and have him tell stories. I don't care what he wants to talk about. Let's have lunch with him." Anyway, that's how we got to be friends, was through like my love of Dick Donner. And then as time went by, I didn't want to, when you have a deal at a studio and they give you an office, they kind of expect you to like work. And I was not good at that part. And so I just decided, I had a friend that was a film producer, and he was renting a house in the Valley in Studio City, and using it like an office, like a regular house. So like the bedrooms were offices, and the living room was the meeting room, and then the dining room was like everyone had lunch together, and you could make food in the kitchen. And I was like, this is genius. It's not zoned for this, but this is awesome. So I found this little bungalow, and it was little, like it was like 1,000 square feet. And I called Geoff and I said, let's do this. It'll be our kind of like our clubhouse. Like, we can hang out and talk comics, and we can have our friends come over and we could do comics. And so that's how I met Alan Heinberg, and Brian K. Vaughan would come by every now and then, and Sterling Gates, like all these guys would like come by, and word got out, because we called it the Empath Magic Treehouse. And we used to say that it was like Doctor Strange's Greenwich Village house, that like if you stood on the street, you couldn't see it unless we wanted to, magically you could see it. And we never told anybody where we were. You had to like really know us to get there to come over. But once you came over, you could come over anytime you wanted. Like, we were there from like 10 in the morning till 10 at night, like hanging out. And he would come in every day, and he would have a buck slip, and it would say Hawkman 4 pages, JSA 3 pages, Flash 6 pages. And I would go, "What's that?" And he'd go, "Well, that's what I got to accomplish today. I have to get my artists this stuff." And I'm like, I have to write a whole script. I can't write 4 pages and give it to an artist. Like, it's a symphony to me. I can't, it's like saying, like, okay, just the tubas do this. Well, I don't know what the violinists are doing. So I have to write the whole thing to see if it works. And so most of my time it would take like 2 weeks. So most of my time literally would be like the first 10 days. I would come into the office, and he would go, "What are you working on?" And I'd go, "Working on the Hulk." And he'd go, "Okay, how's it going?" I said, "Well, I haven't started yet." He goes, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm thinking about it. And then he, at literally every day at 5 o'clock, he would pack up his little briefcase and he'd come out and knock on my door and he'd say, hey, how you doing? And I'd be like, you know, feet up on the chair, like reading comics or working on something, not comics. And he'd go, did you get anything done today? And I'd go, no, didn't. Did you get anything done? And he was everything. He had discipline. And I had madness. And we just were friends. That's how it started. And then we just knew each other. We shared the bungalow for like 10 years. And then literally on the same night, I was in New York and I'm out to dinner with Dan Buckley, who's then the president of Marvel. And he says to me while we're at dinner, he says, listen, you do a lot of television. And I go, yeah, I do. Why? He said, well, Marvel's bought Disney. Disney's bought Marvel. And we're interested in starting a television division. Would you want to run it? And I was like, wait, what? Hang on a second. Now, while this is happening, my phone is blowing up from Geoff. Like, he rings and I'm just going to, you know, voicemail, and then it rings. And by the third time that he's called, I'm sort of thinking that the house is burned down. Like, there's no reason why Geoff would ever call me that many times. So I say to Dan, okay, just hold that thought. I just got to find out what this is about. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to step outside. And I remember this so clear. It was December. I didn't even take my coat. So I'm standing like in a t-shirt and jeans outside on the street in New York City. And I'm like, I go, Geoff, is everything okay? Like, are you all right? And he goes, yeah, I have a super big problem and I need to ask you right now because they want an answer. And I said, who? What? And he said, well, DC wants me to be the head of movies and television for them. And I said, look, very funny. I don't know how you know, but I'm having dinner with Dan Buckley and he just asked me if I wanted to run the television division. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah. And he goes, so they're asking you, and why'd you call? He goes, because they want an answer right now. And so I just wanted to call and see what you thought. And I said, dude, do it. And he goes, well, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, I don't know how to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back in. I said, here's the one thing that I do know is we're the only two people that understand comics and television. So we should ask for a boatload of money. So what are you going to ask for? I'm going to ask for this. Well, I think we should ask for this. Okay, well, let's do that. So I come back in and now I'm all like pumped up. I'm like, like Dan's going, okay, so we're thinking about you. I said, yeah, let's talk about this. Okay. Because like, who else is going to do it? Like Geoff Johns? I don't think he's available. And so that's how we both wound up being. And then the sort of bittersweet part was that we realized that the Empath Magic Treehouse was over. Like we were going to have to get rid of the house and we were both going to go work in Warner Brothers and at Marvel, and that's what happened.
Man, what a special story. So now we're about to go back a little bit before that era and talk about the development of Hush, and we're going to lead into Hush 2, which is still in the works right now, or not? Yeah, still in circulation right now. But talk about how that got started, because Hush was Jim Lee's first major Batman project. And he did that with you, but how did all that come together? Obviously, you're the writer, so it started in your head.
So I'm at this point. I'd done Long Halloween, and I'd done Dark Victory, and I think we'd done Catwoman in Rome, and Tim and I didn't have a book at the time, and I still, you know. I wish I had. No, we may have been doing the color books. I can't remember the exact timeline of all of it. But I do know that years later he said that it kind of hurt his feelings because he sort of felt like Batman was ours. But I was like on the other side of the fence going, I'm getting to work with Jim Lee. Like I'm like, this is the guy that he sold 8 million copies of the X-Men. I'm doing that. And so, but this is how it happened. And it's 100% Mark Chiarello. Mark Chiarello was then the head of art and design at DC, and they lost a major piece of talent when they let him walk out the door. But in addition to that, he is one of my favorite artists and colorist. He just has a vision of what stuff is, and a really good friend of Tim's and mine, and has, like, we all love the same movies, so we use movie references all the time, and obscure, like, movies from the 40s. I'm not talking about, like, have you seen the latest Marvel movie? Like, that's not who we are. Like, we talk about, like, movies that everyone would go, I have no idea what you're talking about. But anyway, Mark calls me on the phone and he says, so Jim Lee wants to do like a Long Halloween kind of story, but he wants to do it with you. So I said, can Jim draw like 12 issues in a row? And he goes, well, we'll find out. He said, but he's only doing it with you. So if you want to do it, you got to tell me. And I was like, well, are you going to be the editor? And he said, well, I can't be the editor. I'm just trying to see whether or not I can put this package together. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, sure. I mean, if I get a chance to work with Jim, I'd be happy to do that. What I didn't know was he then hung up the phone and called Jim Lee, who knew nothing about this, and said, so I was talking to Jeph Loeb, and he's got this idea for like a Long Halloween mystery that he really wants to do with you, but he only wants to do it with you. And Jim was like, well, yeah, I'd love to work with Jeph. That'd be great. So, and neither one of us knew that we'd been playing. And so the next thing we knew, like everyone agreed it had to be a secret, because nobody really thought, I'm not telling any tales that Jim doesn't know about, nobody thought Jim would actually finish the book. That he'd get out to about 4 or 5 issues and then flat tire, and that would be the end of it. That he just didn't have the stuff in him to do it. And so what they said to us was, this was about a year before. They said, by next Valentine's Day, you have to have 7 issues in the can, done, ready to go. You're going to start in October because you have had good luck launching books in October. So if you do 7 issues, then you have from February until October and then plus the 7 issues. So you almost have another year to do the last 5 issues. Will you make that deal? And Jim said, I'll make that deal. And I thought, piece of cake. We have like 2 years to do this. We'll just get it done. And Mike Carlin took a $100 bill and put it on his bulletin board and bet Jim that he couldn't do the 7 issues. There was no way he was going to do the 7 issues. Well, if you know anything about Jim, he is the most competitive guy I've ever met in my entire life. And that, more than anything, got him to go, I'm getting that $100 bill. I'm going to get those 7 issues done, and it's going to be beautiful. And we're going to have Scott Williams, and we're going to have Alex Sinclair and Richard Starkey, and we're going to put the band together. We're going to do this thing. And so I had this idea of this childhood friend who grew up and had a very similar life to Bruce, but turned a different corner. And I just thought it was a cool idea, but I didn't know as we started, because we had to go like right away. And I didn't know like what his costume was going to look like. And I didn't really know what he was going to look like. I knew what Tommy was going to look like, but I didn't know what he was going to look like. So I said, Jim, just wrap his face in bandages and I'll make him a plastic surgeon. And then when he takes it off, I don't know, maybe he looks like Bruce Wayne. Maybe he looks like, I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there, which is always a good way to tell a story. And he's wearing a trench coat, and you can barely ever see what he's wearing underneath the trench coat. You see that he's got boots and a trench coat. And as time went by, we were both like, this is kind of cool that he looks like this. He kind of looks like the unknown soldier. He kind of looks like Negative Man, but he isn't. He's a villain. So it's like there wasn't anybody that looked like that. And finally, when in the Jason Todd issue, where of course it wasn't Jason because Jason was dead and should have stayed dead as far as I was concerned. When Jim drew that page, and the coat is open, and he's wearing this sort of black leathers, and it's got a red H on there. I was like, and he had a little tuft of white in his hair. I was like, wow, maybe we should do Jason. Like, he's cool. Like, this is a cool looking guy. And then I said, no, the story was always Tommy. People ask me all the time, was it going to be Jason? I was like, it wasn't. Jason was dead. Like, there was no way it was going to be Jason. And anyway, because it was a secret, Jim and I, if you've ever seen an original art, there's always the name of the book and the number of the issue, so that if the artwork ever gets scanned or it gets lost or it gets put together, they're like pieces of a puzzle. You can just go, well, we're missing page 9 because I have all the pages here but page 9. So we had to come up with a code name, which again was not something that DC had ever done. They were like, what do you mean a code name? I said, well, we can't call it Batman because if somebody finds one of the things lying around, they're going to go, Jim Lee's doing Batman. Of course, there's a picture of Batman that he's drawn, but for some reason we thought, well, we'll just call it something else. That'll fool everybody. And so we called it Hush. Like, hush, don't tell anybody that we're doing this. And it was to remind our editor, don't leave the artwork around, because in those days you couldn't scan. You just sent it in and they scanned it there. And then you got your artwork back. Now it never leaves your house. It just gets scanned and you send it off. It's all done digitally. So, but again, in Scott's case, because Scott's the inker, like Jim, every time when he sends us the page in pencils on Hush 2, he then goes, messenger is sending it down to you, Scott, today. Because Scott's in San Diego. So like, they pay for a messenger to bring it down to him. But in those days, I don't remember how it was done. And, or they were in the studio, because Wildstorm was still its own studio. And we were about 3 or 4 issues in, and you can go back and look. That no one ever refers to who he is. He just talks in a whisper and he quotes Aristotle, but they don't say who he is because we didn't know. And I literally one day called him and I said, I think I know the name of this character. And Jim was like, who? Like, I can't wait to hear. Like, who's it going to be? I said, it's been on the art board since the first issue. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, his name is Hush. And he goes, that's a cool name. Nobody has that name. That's a cool name. And I said, okay, that's how Hush became Hush.
Wow.
And then it came out, it was this monster hit. And I will always give Jim the credit for it being a monster hit. And it's still, the fact that it's still published and there's like 72 versions of it, you can get a pencil.
Like 608 is like the gift that keeps on giving, man. It has to be the top selling Batman issue. It has to be by now. Do you know?
No, I don't. Actually, the thing about it is 608, the thing about that book that they'd never seen was, and Jim talks about it all the time, it started at like 60,000 units. And then, which was not a lot in those days, but it was what Batman was selling for. And by the time we got to the last issue, we were over 300,000 units. And that arc was why people were like, and we were doing second printings and stuff like that. So we were feeding the beast. But it really wasn't until it became a collection that people were giving it to other people. Like, you got to read this. You got to look at this artwork. It was just like Long Halloween. The same. People ask me all the time, was like, Long Halloween, was that like a big hit? And I was like, actually, one time we outsold Detective. The rest of the time it went Batman, Detective, Long Halloween. But when Long Halloween was collected, it is the go-to that people give to. You walk into any store across the country, it doesn't matter what's coming out. And they go, look, I'd like to read Batman. They go, here you go. Just take here a copy of Long Halloween, a copy of Hush. There you go. You're done. After that, you're just going to want to read every Batman book there is.
Geoff, you're the man of 2024. Two of your greatest hits returned. The Last Halloween.
I'm in 2025 now, though, so it's okay. And we're still working on those books.
Yeah, it's still continuing. The Last Halloween and Hush 2. What brought about the continuation of these two classics, and what concerns did you have about fulfilling fan expectations?
I don't. Again, please don't go on Reddit. Don't call your mom. I love my fans. I say this all the time. I cannot do what I do unless my fans and my readers do what they do. Because believe me, if my books did not sell, DC and Marvel would be more than happy to kick me down a flight of stairs. I've been around so long. I am such a pain in the ass. The only reason why I get to work as much as I do and with the people that I work with is because our books sell. And it's the same as movie stars and television stars and television writers. Like, you work when you have hits. And I can't explain why they work, except I am incredibly grateful to the people that buy the books, because and I think it's amazing and lovely that everyone says, well, because I love the story and the way you write and or I love the artwork, it's amazing. And all I want to do is say, you have to understand it's a partnership. Like, if you don't like what's there, I don't work. I will never do this again. And I took, when I was running Marvel Television, that was 12 years. And during that time, Marvel said, you can either write comic books or run the television division. You can't do both. And every year I was like, so let me understand something. Like, one of your top selling writers is sitting on the bench. That's like taking your best baseball player, like your home run hitter, and going, sorry, you're doing commercials, so you don't get to like play baseball. And they just said, that's the rule. We don't think that you should be having two jobs. And so I was out completely. I was gone. I wasn't doing this anymore. And then Tim passed away. Like, it was all for the wrong reasons. Like, it was like one of my best, dearest friends, and a guy that I would talk to on the phone almost every day. Like, I got a phone call and he was gone. And I was like, wow. And we had been talking about doing The Last Halloween to sort of wrap up the story, because there were some things that we had planted. We had done one thing. We had done the Long Halloween special. And It sold pretty well, and people were sort of happy to see us back together again. And I think they were just happy to see Tim on Batman. And so when that sold well enough, they said, yeah, go ahead, you can do this. And so I wrote 2 scripts so that Tim could kind of get ahead. And then he did very roughs. You can see it there in the back of the book, the first issue. He did very roughs of the first 3 pages, like squiggles, that kind of thing. Like, it wasn't even pencils. You couldn't even call it that. And I just went, well, there's no point in doing this. This is mine and Tim's baby. Like, there's no way I'm going to do this with anybody else. I particularly don't want to do it with one other artist, because that's like, everyone's just going to go, well, it's not Tim Sale, so I don't need this is. And so I'm talking with Mark Chiarello. Yes, that name comes up yet again. And Richard Starkings. And Richard has been the letterer and designer on almost everything I've ever done. And when you want to talk about a mentor, that's like one of my mentors.
You're
like,
so lucky, dude. Mark Chiarello, Richard Starkings, man, these are great people. and
we're just talking, and we were talking about The Last Halloween, and I said, so I guess I called DC and said, just, you paid me for those 2 scripts, that's it. Don't worry about the contract. We're all done. It's fine. And I sort of put it in a drawer and said, well, that's never going to happen. And we were talking one day, and Mark Chiarello says, maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe instead of thinking about trying to find someone to replace Tim, what if we did it as a tribute to Tim? What if we were to get 10 artists that were Tim's favorite artists and ask them to each do an issue? Not asking them to draw like Tim, but use Tim's design. So Batman has really long ears and a cape that makes no sense. It flows and flows and flows, and sometimes it's just at the knees. And Tim used to say, "Yeah, it's a magic cape. What do you want from me?" Whatever looks best graphically, that's where you go. And I would say to all, when I asked everybody, I said, "Look, I'm not asking you to draw like Tim. I want you to draw like you would draw." And then Mark said something that has stuck with me, and I can't wait to the day, which is, he goes, "I want you to imagine Tim somewhere on Pa Kent's front porch in Smallville, and he's in a rocking chair, and he's got the whole thing collected in a hardback edition, and he's just looking at all the artists that worked on this tribute to him, and he's just smiling because they're all his favorite artists." And I went, "Yeah, we should do that." And so the three of us came up with a list of guys. And when I first brought it to DC, they were like, "No, I don't do that. It's impossible. It's going to look like a roller coaster. Nobody's going to understand it. It's not going to work." And I was kind of heartbroken, and I went, "They think I'm going to go ask Jim and Rob Liefeld and Arthur Adams and like basically the Image guys and Arthur's group, Nola, all of my favorite guys, and that's not what we're doing. We're doing people. Some of these people I don't even know. I know their work, but I don't know them at all." And so I put together a list that had like Eduardo Rizzo on it, and Becky Cloonan on it, and Chris Samney, and Matteo Scalera, and obviously Chiarello, and Klaus Janson, and Bill Sienkiewicz, and Enrico Marini, just everybody, Dave Johnson, and Cliff J. That's it. I remembered everybody's name. And I send in the list, and they said, "You're never going to get everybody on this list. So you should be prepared to ask 3 people from this list to each do 3 issues." And I was like, "No, I don't want to do that. I'll come up with another list before I do that." I said, "But will you give me permission to ask the people? And I will say to them, I don't work for DC. I don't have the authority to do this. You still have to make a deal with them. And if you can't make a deal, I'll completely understand. It's not a problem." And every single person I called, it was the same conversation. I would call and I'd go, "Hey, I know we've never worked together. I know you don't really know me, but we're thinking about doing this tribute book for Tim. I'm in." "Well, do you want to know what it is?" "I don't care. I love Tim, and whatever it is." I said, "Well, it's going to be like 24 pages. You have to do a whole issue." "Okay, I'm in." I said, "How long do I have?" "Well, you could have a year." "Well, I can do 24 pages in a year. I can fit that in with my regular job or whatever I'm doing." And I was like, "Okay." I said, "And what is it?" And I said, "Well, it's the sequel to Long Halloween." Done. So I went back to DC. I said, "I got all 10. And they were like, "Yeah, maybe they were just being polite. Maybe whether or not we can find them." And so they went out and made 10 deals, and they wouldn't let me start until all 10 deals were done. And that's when I started, and I started writing it for different guys, and some guys I was sort of ahead of, and some guys I was behind on, and it's all done now. So the last 2 issues haven't come out, but it's all done and finished and beautiful.
And so, perfect segue, Jeff. When Batman 162 drops, I don't think this has ever happened in Batman history, but 2 volumes of Batman will be on the stands concurrently because Matt Fraction and Jorge Jimenez, they just dropped Batman #1, I believe, last week.
Yes.
So that means Batman's about to end with the year with the bang. Because I mean, last year,
yeah. I mean, so now I'll go to the other story, which is I'm now back in the game. Clearly, I'm working for DC. Jim knows I'm working at DC. I don't think that really had an effect on it. Is that so? I am in, of all places, Pisa, Italy. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm waiting for a plane in order to take off, and I look down at my phone. Jim and I, right after Hush 1 ended, said we should do this again. And then about every 2-3 years, I would call him and go, "You want to do this?" And then, like, I remember 5 years ago, it was right after COVID. I did a really bad thing. There was a list of the 10 greatest artists that worked on Batman, which to me, like, there's Neil and then there's everybody else. And Jim was number one. And I printed it out and I said, we got to have breakfast. And we go to breakfast because he's in LA. We go to breakfast and I said, listen, I'm going to do something terrible. And he goes, okay, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to give you a present. And I show him the pages in this article and he gets to the number one and he looks and he goes, oh, that's nice. That's really nice. I really appreciate you doing this. I said, Jim, you drew that book 15 years ago. Is that what you want to be known for? You want to be known for being the best Batman artist from 15 years ago? Or do you want to be the guy who went out on top? Like, I was playing to his competitive side. I didn't know anything about Matt Fraction. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. I just was like, I mean, this was 5 years ago. I said, we'll just go and do it again. And he said, you give me a lot to think about. I'll think about it. Ghosts me. Never hear from him. He's busy. He's the publisher. He's doing whatever he's doing. I'm doing whatever I'm doing. It's fine. I'm sitting in an airport in Italy 5 years later. This is now 2 years ago. And I pick up the phone. It's Jim. And I'm like, again, when I don't hear from somebody and they suddenly call me, like, I'm like, are you okay? Because, you know, I've lost a lot of I lost Mike Turner. I lost Carlos Pacheco. I lost Tim Sale. Like, I don't want that phone call. I don't want Jim calling me and telling me, I don't want you to hear from anybody else, but blah, blah, blah. So, but I pick up the phone and he goes, Jeff? I go, yeah. He goes, Jim. I go, yeah. What's up? Are you okay? And he goes, we're going. Now, Jim spends a lot of time in Italy. So I thought he was in Italy. I said, oh, great. Where are we going? Are we going to, like, I'll meet you in any city. What do you want to do? He goes, no, we're starting. I said, no, great. What are we doing? We're starting dinner? Great. Okay, when are we going? And he goes, no, we're going to do Hush. I said, what are you talking about? It's been 23 years. I don't even know whether or not either one of them, like, what are you talking about? It's like the Rolling Stones going back out on tour. And he goes, we're doing this. I just renegotiated my contract. And part of my contract is I don't have to go to the office every day so that I can have 3 consecutive days every week to draw. So I figure I can do 3 or 4 pages in that time and I can finish a book in about a month's time. And I was like, or 2 months time. And I said, well, what about the rest of the gang? He said, I've already spoken to Scott and I've spoken to Alex and they're on board. And you can talk to Richard and see who's not. Let's put the band back together again. And so we were working on it in secret. And the idea was to finish and then Matt Fraction was going to start. But we always knew I said, Jim, we're not going to get 12 issues done in the amount of time that we have. So we're going to break it and do sort of Hush 2 Part 1 and Hush 2 Part 2. So again, I explain this to people all the time. Guys, it's like Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. It's like Wicked 1 and Wicked 2. It's the same movie, it's just cut into 2 parts. We're not coming back and telling a different 6-issue story. Where that story lands, we haven't announced yet, the back 6. And then, you know, as it happens in this business, stuff happens. Jim's pretty much done with issue 5. I only see them, I can't remember if it's 162 or 163 or whatever it is. He's pretty much done. It's so gorgeous. Part of it is I forgot his need for perfection So like I'm writing like close up of Batman. Batman's in the dark. You can just see his eyes. A lot of ink. Like moving on. And then of course Jim doesn't do that. He draws the entire Batcave behind him, and and every robot has to work properly. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever, dude. We're never going to finish this book. And then the thing that I don't think anyone counted on was the Superman became this monster hit. And so now Jim, you have to remember, Jim's the president and publisher at DC. So he's got to go out and like do all this like Superman stuff. And he's going to foreign countries and like opening Superman, and he's drawing covers of Superman. And when Superman Man of Tomorrow got announced the other day, sure enough, there's a picture of Superman standing next to Lex Luthor in that cool green outfit. And Jim's drawn it, and I'm thinking to myself, that's another page that we didn't get done today. But I hope the fans are loyal. They certainly seem to be really happy with what Matt's doing, and I believe in my heart, and Jim believes in his heart, that there's an awful lot of people that will read this as a collected edition, and so that's where we're going to find our audience, just like they did the first time. And they can read Matt Fraction's monthly, and then they can read our story all in one piece, like it was a movie that came out. It's like having a movie and a television show on at the same time, as far as I'm concerned. And we just had to be really careful in our story that whatever it is that we changed didn't affect what Matt was doing. And I knew what Matt was doing, and I spent a lot of time talking to Matt, and went, is this happening? Is that happening? Well, what about this? And so our story, even though the second half of that story will be out next year, and Matt will be on like issue 9 or something like that, it still takes place before Matt's story begins.
Right.
But it's
and
not like
always dependent on being 12 issues, the Hush 2, so it was always dependent on 12.
It's always going to be 12, and it was always going to be in 2 pieces.
I think with Matt Fraction and these last issues of Hush, the last couple issues of Hush, I think this year is going to end with the huge Batman bang. So I think this is going to actually benefit like everybody, because
absolutely our hope was, because we didn't know about Absolute Batman when we were starting this out. Our hope was, that was the original plan, was to get Batman back up in a place where like it was selling hundreds of thousands of copies, so that when Matt's book started, that the jump from here to here was not from here to way up here. And I just heard yesterday that his first issue outsold our first issue, and I just thought that's how it should be, man. Like, take the reins, go kill. And I hope that a year from now you're still outselling us. Like, that's the coolest thing in the world. And I love Jorge's artwork, and but it's a very different Batman, and right. That's the cool thing about Batman. And I have to give a shout out to my friend Tom Taylor and the guys that are over on Detective, because that's a beautiful book. Does not get the love that the other books get. And people should that's a really cool book. And if you're buying all these other Batman books, like if you're buying Absolute and you're buying Hush and you're buying Matt Fraction's Batman, you need to be buying Detective too. That's my official plug for all of that.
All right, so take us home, Mark.
All right, so help us settle a debate. You were everywhere last year pushing Hush out. Do you have a favorite convention for us? No shade on any of the other conventions. Say you love every convention. What's your favorite convention?
You're not going to love my answer. My answer is the same as if you asked me what's my favorite character or my favorite issue. I get asked those questions a lot, and I don't think of stories the way that a lot of people do. I think of the experience of it. The best way I can describe it is when I hear music, I know nothing about how to make music, so I'm not going to sit there and go, that's a really cool guitar riff, and wow, when the drums come up, that's awesome. And I love the lyrics of this song. It's not. It's I remember where I was when I first heard that song, or if that's a song that I had with a friend or somebody I was dating or something like that, I go there. And so I have 100,000 comic books. I have never, ever been able to, and I've had a number of places where I've lived, I have never been able to park my car in my garage. My garage is my clubhouse. And so but you can open any box and take out any comic, and I can tell you where I was when I read it and what the feeling was. And so when people ask me what my favorite character is, it's like, no, I remember when I was working with Mike Turner on that and what it was like working with Mike. Or I remember what Jim was like when we were doing Hush 1 and what Jim's like now, and what it's like every time when a page comes in, that's magic to me. Because I can't draw, and I'm always like, how does this happen? And people go, well, you wrote the script, and I'm like, yeah, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. And so the same thing is with conventions. It's like I go there to meet people, and it does not matter whether or not they're in Hawaii or they're in San Diego or they're in New York City or they're in Motor City. They're outside of Detroit. I went to a show in Lexington, Kentucky. The odds of me going to Lexington, Kentucky for anything is 0. But I wound up going there for a comic book convention. And you know what? I met the nicest people who want to talk about comics and hang out and that's what I love doing. Because I have an opportunity to thank the people who gave me a chance to do what I love. Like, I don't think DC and Marvel ever gave me a chance to do anything. I think the readers gave me the chance to do that. And so when those readers come up to me and go, I just want to say thank you, and this book means so much to me, I get a lot of that on Spider-Man Blue in particular, because it's an emotional story and everyone's had a first love and a love lost and that kind of thing, and it touches them in that way. I didn't write it for that reason. I wrote it because people were forgetting Gwen, and both Tim and I loved Gwen and wanted just to have something. Like, there wasn't a Spider-Gwen then. She didn't come from another planet or whatever the hell she is. I love her in the Across the Spider-Verse stuff. I think it's awesome. But that only happened because somebody thought about it in the comics. And so, I just wanted to tell a story about who Gwen was and what she meant to Peter. And I didn't want to tell a story about how she died. Everyone had told that story. And then I suddenly realized out of those color books that there were so many women who were really responsible for the hero becoming the hero that they became. And I didn't like that Karen Page had died, and I didn't like that Betty had died in the Hulk. And I wanted to be able to tell a story of what they were like at the very beginning. And so that was the idea. But when you ask me about those books, what I remember is working with Tim on it and the magic that he brought to it and what it was like in that way. And so that was my long-winded way of answering your question of what's my favorite comic book.
I got a bonus question, because he's about to ask you our boiler point last question. He's still going to ask it, but I'll be remiss to not ask a question about the great Michael Turner and the great Ed McGuinness. Those are two highly influential artists in their own right. If you could just speak a little on those two artists for us.
Michael was everything you ever wanted in a human being. Like, he and Tim were like brothers from another mother. Like, they just loved people. That's who they were, and could talk about it all the time. The irony was that the cancer that Mike had was the same cancer that my son had, and so I think we just had a bond that was. And I never thought that I was going to be living in a world where Mike was still alive and I lost my son. I thought it was going to be the other way around because Mike was older. And that particular kind of cancer tends to take people that are older, not when kids in their teens. And so that loss was particularly devastating because of how much it meant on a personal level. But on the other side, to this day, there's nobody who draws women the way that Mike drew women. it just, everybody looked like they just walked off the cover of Cosmopolitan. And he would do it without any reference at all. Like I would watch him draw, and I'd be like, do you have like model sites up? And like, is this like, are you like looking at these? And he'd be like, no, this is what, and his girlfriend at the time looked like something that he drew. I used to tease him about it all the time. Did you just draw her in the lab and just bring her out? So a great guy and a beautiful artist, and bringing Supergirl back, you know, in that is the Supergirl that's going to be in this movie. Like, that's incredible. And then Ed was something that I had never really done in you know, really since Tim, which was I'm friends with Joe Madeira, and he said to me, I'm gonna send you some pages from this kid who I think is like the next big thing. And he sent me these pages, and I flipped. I was just like, who is this guy? His name's Ed McGuinness. He lives up in Maine. He's got like 5 kids, and like he's just learning to draw. He wasn't learning to draw. It was just like he's at the beginning of his career. And so I got on the phone with him, and you know, again, one of the things about having early success is that when you then later on go, hi, it's Jeph Loeb, they're not sitting on the phone going, yeah. They're like, oh, hi, what's up? And so, and there was like this Wolverine special, 97, I think, something like that. And I said, look, I'm looking for an artist. And it really was just sort of let's see if we can work together. And he said, can we do like a really big giant robot? And I went, yeah, Ed, you can do whatever you want. That's how I work. Like I don't work the way most, I've been told that most writers, there's a book that's called Comic Writers on Comic Writing that came out like a year after Challenge of the Unknown. And there's interviews with 10 guys. And there's Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman and Mark Waid. And the guy says, I want to do you. And I'm like, I've done 8 issues. What are you talking about? Well, we just thought it might be interesting to have somebody who was just starting out and who's a fan. And I was like, okay, go ahead. So we agreed to do this. It's an interview. It's still in there. And he said, well, let me start by asking you a question, which is, who do you write for? And I was like, I don't understand the question. He said, when you're writing, who do you write for? I said, I write for the artist. And he said, that's really interesting. And I said, why? Who else would you write for? I didn't even understand the question. And he said, well, a lot of people that we talked to said that they either write for the fans, which I think is actually a BS answer. I don't think anyone actually writes for the fans, because the fans change every hour on the hour. Who are you writing for then? If that happens?
Right.
And you know, how, if you're writing Superman, how are you, and the fan, and he's a Green Lantern fan, how are you writing that book? Like, you're not writing for the Green Lantern fan, you're writing for, so I didn't understand that answer at all. And then I think the real answer is they write for themselves. That's not a slam on anybody. Please don't say that I am slamming somebody. Like, what I'm saying is that that I think of myself as a partner with the person that I'm working with.
Right.
And so when I start working with somebody, the first thing that I do is I spend the first week, 2 weeks, if I'm starting to get to know this person, to sort of go, what do you like to draw? What do you want to draw? What's your favorite character? Is there anybody that we can guest star with? Is there anybody you want to cross over into? Because I'll just do anything. And so, like with Ed, it was like, I want to draw a giant robot. And I was like, okay, we can draw a giant robot. If that's what you want to do, we'll go do that. And so, you know, fortunately there was Red Ronin, and, you know, and we could do that. And so Red Ronin's running around I said, we'll just do it all in Japan and have fun and have Wolverine running around. And on the basis of that, you know, we just hit it off. And then, you know, one thing led to another, and suddenly we got asked to do Superman. And it was one of those things that at that point, when they called and said, we need somebody to take over the Superman book, would you be interested in doing that? I said, I'll only do if I can do it with Ed. And they said, well, let's go get him. So we went to go get Ed, and the rest is what it became. And then Superman Batman came after that, and then, and then he and I see each other every now and then, and we talk every now and then, and I'm like, dude, you gotta come out. Like, we gotta go do something else, because he's under contract at Marvel. And he's like, no, I really dig drawing Spider-Man. Why don't you write Spider-Man? I said, because I don't want to write Spider-Man. I like Spider-Man because Joe Kelly writes a great Spider-Man, and that's who's doing it. Like, so I don't want to be on a monthly book. And I've told my Spider-Man story, I think. That doesn't mean Spider-Man can't. I love putting Spider-Man into stuff. So whenever Ed and I were when we were working on the Avengers with Cable and all that stuff, Spider-Man came by. I was like, yeah, sure. When I did the Death of Captain America, I won issues with Dave Finch. It was like, I said, Dave, who do you want to do? He goes, I want to do Spider-Man. I said, okay, we'll do Spider-Man. Dave's great. Dave's amazing.
Jeph, we have one last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming appearances? Any new projects?
I will be at New York Comic Con. As I always say to everybody, just look for Arthur Adams and you'll find me. I'm sitting next to him. Because evidently you can't find me, but you can find Arthur. He's really easy to find. That's the line around the block. And
then pick up us too, right? Pick up us too. Pick up Black Halloween.
No. And look, Hush 2 is still going, and I think we talked a lot about how, it'll be out by the end of the year, and then the first part, and then the second part will be next year. We have 2 more issues of The Last Halloween. I don't know how much of that will be out by New York. I hope it will be. It's certainly going to be out by Baltimore, which is the one I'm doing right after that, a week later. And then the thing that I'm super excited about, which actually comes out next week, is that I'm returning to the X-Men for the first time, and I can't even tell you. That's literally been 20 years. And again, it was one of those situations where I'm working with an artist it was like the Ed McGuinness thing. I saw his stuff. I thought it was cool. His name is Simone DeMeo. He is the next monster artist. He is just gigantic. Loves the X-Men more than anything else in the world. And I said, if we're going to do this, I want to use the Age of Apocalypse characters. And because it's the 30th anniversary, I think that's what it is. And so Marvel was like, yeah, we got to do stuff. I didn't know they were doing 9 other things. But the good news is it's a story that's in continuity, that counts, that changes things for the X-Men. I've been working really closely with the people in that office and with the writers to go, this is the change that happens. So there's going to be stuff that comes out of this. It's just a 6-part story. But the first issue, which will explain everything, comes out literally. It was supposed to be out this week. It's coming out the 10th. Go get it. It's the Alpha. It's a 30-page story. Joe Mad cover. Unbelievable artwork on the inside by Simone, who's also the cover. If you're a Gambit fan, if you're a Sabretooth fan, if you're a Wild Child fan, if you're a Blink fan, if you're a Forge fan, if you're a Rogue fan, all those people are running around in this book, and they're the Age of Apocalypse characters. And then they're coming here, which nobody ever done before. So we're just going to tell the story, and it's not a dream, and it's not a parallel world. It's not any of that. It's what really happened. And so be there for that.
Be there. Jeph, thank you so much for joining us. Taking time out of your busy schedule. Just know that you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station. So thank you once again. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Jeph Loeb. We are out. Peace.
Sig Slayers.